Well, hello everybody. I'm Andy Oakley and welcome to this presentation. In this presentation, I'm going to go through the treaty claim I made to the Waitangi Tribunal. We're going to look at a background of the treaty, how the Waitangi Tribunal reacted to my claim. So let's start with why I made a claim. Well, I grew up in Cannons Creek. I spent my first 20 years in Cannons Creek, growing up amongst Pacifica European Maori. Our families were mixed. And things got pretty bad in Cannons Creek, particularly after the late 70s, 80s and into the 90s. We saw the introduction of gangs and things got pretty bad. So anyway, I got out of Cannons Creek and got on with my career, and I got to my late 40s and I started to look back at Cannons Creek, and I realised that actually it was a lot worse and bigger. And not only that, there were Cannons Creeks all over New Zealand now. So I was also hearing more and more treaty claims, and the treaty claims were supposedly to lift Maori out of all the negative social statistics that they were appearing in. But it seemed to me the more claims that they were making, the worse things got for them. So I decided to research the treaty, figure out what it was all about, and how it seemed that there was a small crowd of iwi elite getting rich, and my friends and family in Cannons Creek were going backwards. And so this presentation and my treaty claim is the culmination of that research, and also these two books, Cannons Creek to Waitangi and Once We Were One, The Fraud of Modern Separatism. So let's get on and have a look at some of the background of the treaty. Firstly, let's have a look how the Waitangi Tribunal came into being. Just grab a marker here. Well, we can see that the Act, the Treaty of Waitangi Act, which established the Waitangi Tribunal, commenced in October 1975. Now, this was just before, a few weeks before a general election. The Labour government put this in. They had no mandate to do so. I believe what they were trying to do was appease a minority group, Maori, to win that election. But unfortunately in 1975, there wasn't enough teeth in the Act, and I don't think it was too late to have had any great effect. So they lost that election, National won it. But because the Act was race-based, whether it's National or Labour, subsequent governments have been too scared to meddle with it. They think it'd be political suicide to do so. So let's have a look at the preamble in the first sentence. So this is about what is the Act about. So it says, whereas on 6th February 1840, a treaty was entered into at Waitangi between Her late Majesty Queen Victoria and the Maori people of New Zealand. So that's the document we're interested in this Act. It is the 1840 treaty. The next sentence says, and whereas the text of the treaty in the English language differs from the text of the treaty in the Maori language, that it is desirable, in the next sentence, that a tribunal be established. So they're talking about there's two different treaties: an English language treaty, which differs, has different words and meanings, I'm imagining, we'll find out as we go through, to the Maori language. And that is the purpose, it seems to be the sole purpose of establishing this tribunal. And they are to make recommendations on claims relating to the practical application of the principles of the treaty. So we might have a look if we can see any principles. And for that purpose, to determine its meaning and effect, and whether certain matters are inconsistent inconsistent with those principles. And we can see down here that there's under the interpretations, and two interpretations, that the people that can make claims are Maori. And Maori, this is the definition of Maori in the Act. Maori means a person of the Maori race of New Zealand and includes any descendants of such a person. Let's have a look at some background to the treaty. From about 1769, when Cook arrived in New Zealand, a relationship developed between Britain and the people of New Zealand. This developed over a period of time. Missionaries came here, there was trading. There was a number of problems in New Zealand, and some of the people of New Zealand were worried that the French were going to annex New Zealand. So a number of chiefs wrote to the king and asked for protection. Initially, the British people weren't too interested in New Zealand, but finally in late 1830s, they decided that they would do something. They would attempt to arrange a treaty to see if the people of New Zealand wanted a British government. So they sent Captain William Hobson in late 1839 to New Zealand. He picked up James Freeman as a secretary from Australia. And they started, they arrived in New Zealand January 1840, and they made a proclamation that they were going to put a treaty together to see if the people wanted to a British government. And they sat down and began to try and distill the long Lord Normanby instructions to a preamble and 3 short articles. We can see the highlighted area. These are the notes dated about the 1st of February. They are in the handwriting of William Hobson. And you can see that he's addressing the treaty there to the native chiefs and tribes of New Zealand. Now, it must be remembered that Captain Hobson and James Freeman were not familiar with the different groups of people in New Zealand and how they interacted with each other. Basically, they were foreigners and trying to do their best. Only a day or so into the drafting process, Hobson becomes ill. It's believed he has a stroke. And so the secretary, James Freeman, continued to work on the preamble and tries to create some of the treaty articles. So you can see now in the handwriting on the left is now James Freeman's handwriting. He has a particularly royal style of writing, and it's drawn out and lengthy. It's decided that this is not suitable for the treaty. They really want something clear to read to the people of New Zealand. So the final draft is left to James Busby, the British resident. He'd been in New Zealand for a long time. He was familiar with the people of New Zealand. And here is the document here, these two pages. He completed the document on the 4th of February, on the afternoon of the 4th of February, and he handed it to Edward and Henry Williams, who translated it into Te Tiriti o Waitangi in the Ngāpuhi dialect. And we can see here that James Freeman has removed the references to natives, and he's using the terms to the chiefs, tribes, and to all the people of New Zealand, as we see here in Article 2, written as Kina tangata katoa o nu tirani. So this document was filed with James Clendon, who was the US consul's lawyer, who was Henry Littlewood, after the February 5th, 1840 reading of the treaty at Waitangi. Now, it wasn't found again until 1989, which is 14 years after the treaty legislation was enacted. So The legislators who put together the Treaty of Waitangi Act did not have this paper with them when they wrote that act. On this slide, I've put together the English draft of Busby using the exact words from that document and put them alongside the document that was translated from it by Henry and Edward Williams. I've done that so that we can understand who the treaty was addressed to and what it was for. So if we started in the English document, it states Her Majesty Victoria, Queen of England, in her gracious consideration for the chiefs and people of New Zealand. So who were the people of New Zealand in 1840? Well, they were the various tribes and groups living all over New Zealand. They obviously were the people that existed after the tribal warfares. A number of people had been either assimilated into other groups or weren't there at all anymore. But anybody who lived in New Zealand was referred to as a person of New Zealand. And the next part, what is the Queen wanting to do? Well, she desires to preserve their land. So prior to the treaty, a number of chiefs were selling off large tracts of land to speculators, people from Australia, missionaries. Up to 2/3 of the landmass of New Zealand had been sold off, and you know one of the purposes of the treaty was to look at that. The British would look at those sales and either quash some of them or reduce them severely, so the impact wasn't so bad on the people of New Zealand. Also, to maintain peace and order among them. So many people, Ron Crosby's Musket Wars, Dr. John Robinson has written a number of books about the horrific tribal warfare that existed in New Zealand. The depopulating warfare that took a population from about 120,000 in 1800 to about 72,000 people in 1840. As I said, those 72,000 were all the different groups. I think there's about 600 different groups in New Zealand, including 2,000 or so Europeans. So let's go on looking at the article first. Firstly, in English, it says, the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes. The Confederation of the United Tribes was James Busby's reference to a group he attempted to set up when he put together the Declaration of Independence. So what he did is he wrote a document stating that the chiefs wanted to establish their sovereignty over New Zealand. He travelled around the country trying to get chiefs to sign this document. It took him about 5 years to get 50 odd signatures from the 600 or so chiefs, but this group never met. They never enacted any laws. So, but because Busby was now writing the treaty, he got to mention this group again. So the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes and the other chiefs who have not joined, so this is all the people of New Zealand, cede to the Queen of England forever the entire sovereignty of their country. So they use the words, it's controversial, they use the words kawanatanga as the translation for sovereignty, but for me, government, kawanatanga government and sovereignty are interchangeable. There's really not much difference, so I don't see much of a problem with that. If we look at, move on to Article 2nd, the Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and tribes and to all the people of New Zealand. So that all the people of New Zealand is translated by Henry and Edward Williams into Ngā tangata katoa o Tirani. So it's very clear they're referring to all the people of New Zealand. What does the Queen confirm and guarantee? Well, she confirms and guarantees the possessions of their lands, dwellings, and all their property. Okay, So that's written as, or translated to Te Tino Rangatiratanga o Rato Whenua. So that term is controversial because today we are told that Te Tino Rangatiratanga means chiefly authority. And I guess in some sense, it does a little bit here. It's referring to the possessions of their lands, Te Tino Rangatiratanga o Rato Whenua. So I guess you could say that's they've got authority over their lands. But just later it says, but the chiefs of the confederation and the other chiefs grant to the chief, to the queen, that's crossed out, the exclusive right of purchasing such land as the proprietors thereof may be disposed to sell, at which prices as shall be agreed upon between them and the persons appointed by the Queen to purchase from them. So if they sold their land, they would be giving up their Tino Rangatiratanga. So that's quite clear. The dwellings is all their dwellings, Rato Kainga, and all their property, o Rato Taonga Katoa. So that's another controversial word. Today we are told the word taonga means treasures. And I think in 1840 there was a word for treasures. I think it was kahurangi, and I stand to be corrected on that. But it's clear in this document that they're referring to their property. So yeah, let's move on to Article 3. Okay, so we move on to Article 3 now. And for me, this is the most important part of the treaty, the most important article, because it's referring to the most amazing social shift in New Zealand's history. Basically, it was the end of tribalism in terms of a way of life in New Zealand. And that's because although the chiefs signed away sovereignty, it was all the ordinary people, or translated as Ngā tangata Maori katoa, who received protection and equality. So if we just have a look at what Busby wrote in English, he wrote, in return for the cessation of the sovereignty to the Queen, the people of New Zealand, which is everybody, shall be protected by the Queen of England, and the rights and privileges of British subjects will be granted to them. So they would be protected, and everybody in New Zealand would get equal rights. This was translated by Henry and Edward Williams into the Ngāpuhi dialect. And rather than using the people of New Zealand, they knew that this was a big change in the social structure of New Zealand, the hierarchical social structure of New Zealand, and that all the ordinary people would be protected and have the rights and privileges of British subjects. So they added in an accentuating word, ordinary, Maori. As I mentioned earlier, Maori in 1840 simply meant ordinary, normal, or usual. There was no political, social, or pan-Maori group in New Zealand in 1840. It comes as a bit of a shock to most people to learn that the word Māori was not a noun referring to pan-Māori in 1840, that it just meant ordinary. And so what I've done is I've taken a snippet out of the Waitangi, or all the Ngāpuhi language documents, the Manukau sheet, the printed sheet, all of them, to show you that in none of them is the word Māori a noun. It's an adjective meaning ordinary. There it is. There is the evidence. You will not find a capital M anywhere in any of the 1840 treaty documents. On this slide, we can see that the word Māori in 1840 was an adjective. It was a ranking word meaning normal, ordinary, or usual. Ranking in that it meant ordinary or normal as opposed to rangatira. The word Māori with a capital M was not in use at all in 1840, and so it doesn't appear in any of the treaty documents or any other New Zealand literature. I have scoured through 1840 or 1840 and pre-1840 New Zealand literature. I have never found anybody using the word Maori, capital M, meaning pan Maori as a single group of people in 1840 or before. The first time I find it is, I think, near the end of 1840, but certainly you just start to see it being used in 1841. So we see the treaty is addressed to the people of New Zealand, not Maori. There's no doubt about that whatsoever, both in the English draft of the treaty and Te Tiriti o Waitangi itself do not mention Maori. So this first sentence in the preamble of the legislation, which says that a treaty was entered into at Waitangi between Her late Majesty Queen Victoria and the Maori people of New Zealand, is wrong. It's false. And if we now move on to the second sentence, and one of the reasons for setting up the Waitangi Tribunal is because, excuse me, the text of the treaty in English language differs from the text in the treaty of the Maori language. So which document which English treaty are they referring to? We need to have a look at that. Well, in 1975, when they got the treaty documents out to draft the legislation, this is what they find. There are 9 sheets here, and they're all these ones are in the, or 8 of them are in the Ngāpuhi dialect, and 7 of them contain all the signatures, their long form of the chiefs that signed the document. But 2 of these things are not like the other. This sheet here is written in English in the handwriting of James Freeman, and it has a wax seal at the top left-hand corner of it. It has the whole pile of signatures of chiefs from the Waikato heads. The other document that is different is this small document, which contains just a few signatures. So the interesting thing is, why would there be an English text document amongst these when nobody, practically nobody outside Russell spoke English? So I've expanded that small sheet, and here we see that there are 5 or 7 signatures from chiefs. So on April the 11th, 1840, this document, the printed sheet, was read by Reverend Maunsell to a gathering of 1,500 or so people at Waikato Heads. At that meeting, they did not have the official large copy designed to take the signatures. It hadn't arrived yet. It did arrive later, and they used it, but on this day, they didn't have that large document. But Reverend Maunsell did have with him a ruined copy of a large version in the handwriting of James Freeman. And they used that to gather the rest of the signatures, and they affix it to the back of this document. Here's that document, the English document with the wax seal that was used to fix it behind the printed sheet. They weren't fixed behind when they opened the documents. They didn't know the relevance of these documents. And we see here that this is a ruined English version. It has a ruined Captain Hobson signature on it. So this document is dated February the 6th, 1840. So that's 2 days after the English draft and 1 day after the reading at Waitangi. So this document could not have been used for the Williamses to translate from. It didn't exist on the 4th of February. It didn't exist on the 5th of February. It's dated the 6th of February. The other thing of importance is no one was read this document in English anywhere in New Zealand. All the huis were to have been conducted in the native languages. Practically no one understood English outside Kororareka or Russell. It has completely different words to those in Te Tiriti or Waitangi. So apart from the signatures, this document or this part of it is irrelevant. Yet in 2006, the government commissioned Dr. Donald Loveridge to pour scorn on the English draft that had suddenly appeared in 1989. That English draft was dated correctly, the 4th of February. It matched Te Tiriti in terms of the words perfectly. It was written on the correct watermark paper from James Clendon's house. And they poured scorn on that document in favour of this irrelevant English document, which was dated incorrectly. And it has many more and different words to the real Ngāpuhi dialect treaty. They have used this document in legislation. They've taught it to the children, and they've used it to divide New Zealanders ever since. In yellow there, these are completely different words than the words in the Ngāpuhi dialect treaty. It's very clear indeed. There is no English Treaty of Waitangi. No one in New Zealand had an English treaty read to them and then subsequently signed it. And this means that since 1975, the Waitangi Tribunal has not been required to do anything because no promises were made to Maori and no principles exist in this simple treaty. Now, this line here, Maori means a person of the Maori race of New Zealand and includes any descendant of such a person. In my estimation, this legislative removing of European ancestry to become Maori is, in the practical sense, legislative eugenics. It means that my son has the star on his belly, which would allow him to make a treaty claim because he has Maori ancestry and can claim, and I can't. Let's move on to my claim, received by, well, sent on March the 6th, 2013, and you can't quite see there. It was received by them on the March the 13th. Now, I'm not going to read the whole claim, it's lengthy, so I'm just going to go through some of the highlights. Firstly, I stated at the beginning that I was Maori. I used a small m, I think, and said as defined later in my claim. Like other tribes do, and the Waitangi Tribunal require, I had to make the claim exclusive. I stated that the claim was on behalf of Te Pākehā. Now, I didn't want to do this. I don't believe there are separate races, and I don't see myself or others as members of racial groups. I don't live like that. But to make the claim, the government forces claimants to identify themselves as members of a racial group. So I was sort of forced to do that. Now, in the background part of the claim, I stated that on February 6, 1840, there were various tribes, social divisions, communities, all linked by social, economic, religious, or blood ties. That they had varying customs, languages, ethnicities, histories, and that they had, many of them had left from different places, they arrived at different times, that they lived separately. In fact, they lived as separate nations, and that none of these people were known as Maori, Pan-Maori, capital M, in 1840. I stated that in 1840 the word Maori was a ranking word, and it meant ordinary or normal as opposed to something higher. I stated that no one knows which of the various groups arrived first, or which ones had been killed off or assimilated into, and that the various tribes who existed in 1840 had all intermarried, they were mingled. I stated that prior to 1840 that without law and order there was little peace, and that war, slavery, cannibalism and murder were common and often went without consequences. I pointed to the text in the treaty that stated that. I stated that the idea that any stage in New Zealand's history, the concept that all the brown people were one race and that everyone else was a different race was ludicrous, offensive, and that science had dismissed this biological nonsense many decades ago. I stated that the English text treaty used by the Crown in this legislation was the wrong document, and they were deliberately using it to confuse people. No one had that English version read to them, and even if they had, they wouldn't have understood a word of it. It is irrelevant. I explained in detail that by looking at the English notes of the treaty in the days leading up to the treaty, that Busby had deliberetely altered the words of James Freeman or the earlier drafts to include all the people of New Zealand, which was translated into Te Tiriti o Waitangi as Kina tangata katoa o Nuturini in Article 2. I stated that the Crown had deliberately covered up the relevance and authenticity of the Littlewood document and instead had allowed false, earlier and incorrectly translated documents to be used as rule and law. These documents appear to favour a Maori with a capital M, and they just made up that race, and now they excluded all the people of New Zealand. I stated that the Crown and others had deliberately changed the meanings of some of the te reo words in Te Tiriti, i.e. taonga and Tino Rangatiratanga. Under the relief section of my claim, I said, like other claims, I claimed compensation from the Crown for racial discrimination, i.e. being incorrectly and racially excluded from making treaty claims for 38 years, obviously much longer now. I stated all the people of New Zealand should have been protected by the treaty, and instead the Crown deliberately altered the document so that they could favour a racial group that they'd just made up. I stated that although the various groups arrived by boat, no one knows who arrived first. And so today Pākehā have been demoted by many as being mere visitors in New Zealand. I stated that Pākehā are often shown as being dishonest and as having fewer rights than other tribes in history lessons taught in our education curriculum. The government actively promote this Pākehā dishonesty in the Treaty of Waitangi roadshows. These were the government put together shows that were taken around New Zealand. It still exists online. What they did is they funneled all the school children of New Zealand through this indoctrination process, with them coming out the other side, not trusting Pākehā and basically hating their country. I stated that because this had gone on for so long, many Pākehā have been forced to feel guilty. I mean, just look at ex-Mayor Andrew Judd in a fit of xenocentrism or the belief that another culture is superior to his own. He keeps stating, and the media keep printing, that Pākehā, we are broken. This is a shocking example. Under the section of my right to claim, I stated that there was no pan-Maori with a capital M entity in New Zealand in 1840. The people of New Zealand were known as New Zealanders. I am a descendant of these people. I am a New Zealander. 2, blood quantum. On my mother's side, there may have been some intermarrying. My mother's family have been here a very long time. I think they arrived in the 1840s or before. I'm not quite sure, but I have furniture handed down through the family dated 1850, so they were here well before that. And there's some talk of intermarrying. I don't know. I don't really care. It's not what I focus on. 3, the Maori Affairs Amendment Act 1974, which basically removed the blood quantum theory and moved more towards a cultural self-identification. So I listed 22 different ways in which I identified as Maori. I'm not going to go through all of them. Here's a few of them. I was born in the Pacific Islands. I'm a Pacific Islander. My ancestors arrived by boat, like Maori. My ancestors have a bond, a special bond with land and water, just like Maori. I grew up amongst Maori. I learned the culture and the language with my Maori mates and girlfriends. I have lived with Maori partners. I have a Maori son. I'm interested in Maori history. I am Indigenous like any other Maori. 4. The Treaty of Waitangi Act allows for a claim by an individual. So I don't have to be a member of a tribe. And that's despite the oppositions from anybody else or any other tribe. It's in the Act. 5. Pākehā were a social division in New Zealand in 1840. So they were a tribe like any other tribe in New Zealand. So my claim was received on the 11th of March. April went by, half of May had gone, and I hadn't heard anything. On May 15th, 2013, I wrote back to them asking them, could you please update me as to whether the claim has been registered as a single new claim, and also the likely timeframe around future processes. June, most of June had gone by. I hadn't heard from them, so now we're at 3 months. So I wrote to them again, stating wanting to know had my claim been registered as a single new claim and the likely time frame around any future processes. The following month, I received correspondence from the Waitangi Tribunal stating that although they had appeared to have my address correct, it appears that I didn't receive their letter dated 24th of May. That's correct. I didn't receive it. I don't believe they sent it. I think they took a photocopy of it and waited to see if I responded. And so here they've sent out a photocopy of an alleged letter that they sent me. In this letter, they say the tribunal is a permanent commission of inquiry charged with, so that's a permanent commission of inquiry, charged with making recommendations on claims brought by Maori relating to actions or omissions of the Crown which breach the promises. So they're telling me now that there are promises made to Maori in the Treaty of Waitangi. Further on in the letter, they state that the claimant must be a Maori. They go on and say, you detail that you meet a number of definitions of Maori. The tribunal requires that you meet the definitions of Section 2 of the Act, which we looked at before. And that's the definition of Maori in that Act it defines a Maori as being a person of the Maori race. So they are telling me in this letter, and so it's in the Act, that I must be a member of the Maori race of New Zealand, and that includes any descendant of such a person. They go on and say, it appears that you do not meet this definition. Right? I don't know how they can do that. Did they look at a picture of me? I don't know how they can do that. 22 different definitions and 5 or 6 different rights for me to claim, and they just say, it appears that I don't meet this definition. They say if you believe that you do meet the criteria of being a Maori under the Act, that is that I'm a person of the Maori race, please provide details of your whakapapa, my family. They want to know who my mother and father are. The Act needs me, or they want me to prove that I am a member of the Maori race, right? That's one thing. They're telling me that I need to tell them who my mother and father are. This is really getting quite bizarre. Almost immediately, I wrote back to them on July 24th, 2013, and I said their letter was entitled More Information Needed. And I said, look, I need to clarify your kind explanations. This is the explanations they gave me of promises and all this sort of stuff. I also said, as I am not being paid for my time without definitions, right? I need them to define the Maori race. I could potentially spend a lot of time gathering information and not provide you with the correct information. Remember, the Act, and they have stated that I need to show that I'm a member of the Maori race. So I've tried 22 different definitions and 5 different rights to claim, and none of them were good enough for them. And in the same letter, I say to them, under the Treaty of Waitangi, I want them to confirm that they're talking about the Ngāpuhi dialect copy of the treaty. Please, can you confirm this is the Treaty of Waitangi that you're referring to? I would like them to please explain what promises the Crown made in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and I want them to please clarify what who these promises were made to. I also said, can you please explain how the people from Papua New Guinea and Taiwan can become the Maori race? These are the regions that the people arrived here from. And could you give me the date that this happened, so it will help me pinpoint my relevant descendants or ancestors, that should have been. Can I stress that until you clearly define who the Maori race is, it may be impossible for me to clearly define I'm descended from them. And I think they cotton on to this because it's the act that tells me that I must be this, and they're going down some other pathway to do with whakapapa. 2 months go by and I don't get an answer from them to my questions. So on September the 8th, 2013, I wrote to them again and said in my earlier correspondence, I've noted that I'm confused about some of your definitions, and for the sake of clarity in our future correspondence and my claim, I await your response. And I want them clearly to answer these questions. Same questions. The Treaty of Waitangi that you refer to in your correspondence to me is the Maori text. What are the promises made in this document? Who are they made to? How could the people of Taiwan and Papua New Guinea become the Maori race? What year did this occur? And could you please give me a definition of what constitutes the Maori race? 2 years go by. Now we're into 2015. This really is bad performance by the Waitangi Tribunal. 2 years have gone by. So I write to them again. And again, I say, because your letter to me explaining the tribunal's role was confusing, twice I have sought clarification. This is the third time, of the following important questions so that I can correspond to you with clarity. And again, it's please confirm which treaty text, please confirm what promises were made in this document and who they were made to. Can you please explain how the Melanesian and Micronesian people can become the Maori race? What year did it occur? And please, can you define what constitutes the Maori race? I hear nothing from the Waitangi Tribunal for 4 long years. Now, on May the 10th, 2019, I get official response from the Waitangi Tribunal, memorandum directions of the Deputy Chairman. They state, this claim concerns the definition of Maori. It doesn't concern the definition of Maori at all. It concerns the definition of the Maori race as interpreted by the tribunal and the rights of non-Maori to make claims against the Crown. There's nothing in my claim suggesting non-Maori can make claims. So they've got this completely incorrect. They say that I challenge the tribunal's understanding of the definition of Maori. I don't. I'm not challenging their definition. I want to know what it is. This is quite a different thing. The Waitangi Tribunal staff wrote to me on 2 different occasions, specially requesting that he confirm he is a Maori, so confirm my race by reference to his whakapapa, iwi, or hapu affiliations. It's got nothing to do with it. You could be adopted or anything. I don't have to be part of a tribe to make a claim. It's ridiculous. They're incorrect. They say Mr. Oakley has not produced the required details for registration. Although he asserts that he may be Maori, I didn't say that I may be Maori. I gave them many different definitions of my self-identification. They are taking that away from me. He asserts that he may be Maori by his own definitions, and that's how we do define ourselves. That's exactly how it works. He identifies as Te Pākehā, No, the claim is made on behalf of Te Pākehā. So that's incorrect. As the tribunal has not received any further information as requested, the statement of claim does not meet the criteria under section 6.1. So they're saying that I'm not a person of the Maori race. So that somehow or other they have become the race categorising people. They don't have that authority. The tribunal cannot register this claim. Yeah. Unlike the Waitangi Tribunal, I respond to letters almost immediately. So just after receiving that, I write to the Waitangi Tribunal. I said, how is it possible for a registry that is operated within the Ministry of Justice, as a government department, to completely ignore my valid requests for clarification, not once, but on 3 separate occasions? They've just ignored my questions. How am I to submit the correct information requested from the Waitangi Tribunal if I don't understand the questions? I stated, it is quite clear to me that if indeed I am a Maori, using whatever method the Waitangi Tribunal uses to find a Maori, then that my claim would be registered. It's just that the Waitangi Tribunal will not respond to me about what that definition method is, or how they have been given the power to determine what race a person is. The Waitangi Tribunal are getting a bit quicker to respond now. They responded to me on 6 June 2019, stating that your claim has been declined on the basis that you did not or could not provide confirmation that you are indeed a Maori. I need to supply information that I'm a member of the Maori race or a descendant of Sana. I'm asking for the definition of the Maori race. Again, they're saying that you need to supply your family information, or hapu or iwi affiliations. I don't need to belong to any of them. It's quite clear in the Act. They say the tribunal does not have statutory authority to reconsider tribunal decisions, as it does not have an appeals process. If I believe that the deputy chairperson has erred in declining to register my statement of claim, the appropriate course of action is to file an application for judicial review proceedings in the High Court. Well, I've been corresponding with the Ministry of Justice for 5 or so years, trying to get them to do anything. I'm not sure what that would do. I may do it. I'm not sure yet. So now we move to the last slide to have a look at what's going on. Well, firstly, the Waitangi Tribunal, which operates within the Ministry of Justice, so this is the government, have falsely stated that the Treaty of Waitangi was signed with Maori. As we've just been through this presentation, that's false. They have hidden the draft of the treaty, which is the evidence that Maori are not mentioned in it. They've put some sort of racial line in the sand, starting at an imaginary point in the immigration of New Zealand. Looks like before any white person arrived. And then they've incorrectly categorised all the separate various nations, including the fair-skinned nations, Waitaha, Ngāti Hautu, Urakehu. They've defined these people as one nation known as Maori. This is despite the word and the pan-Maori people not existing in 1840. They've said that I don't look like or appear to be a Maori. I think they're referring to my blood quantum level. This is racial stereotyping. They're looking at me and making up stories about what I am. And again, this is racial discrimination. They will not recognise my cultural right to self-identification. They're taking that right away from me. My right to cultural self-identification as tangata Māori, or an ordinary person, which is what it meant in the treaty in 1840. And this is as per the Maori Affairs Amendment Act 1974. So this is racial discrimination again. Now, it's also very clear that they are acting outside their jurisdiction. They do not have any racial categorisation powers. And if you ask them how they do it, they'll start asking you who your mother and father are. They won't tell you. So this is the basis of my claim. They are in breach of Article 3 of Te Tiriti, which is where all New Zealanders were granted equal rights. To deny me and other Pākehā this right is in breach of Article 3. And they're doing it, so they're denying me my rights by referring to text that is not part of Te Tiriti. Okay, so look, it's clear that the government made a major mistake in 1975 in referring to the incorrect English treaty. That is a mistake. They've been trying to cover it up ever since by indoctrinating the school children, hiding documents such as the draft, pouring score on documents, failing to communicate with people who ask them. So basically, I think the government are committing fraud here, and that's what this presentation is about, and that's what I want you all to think about. So thank you very much. Hopefully New Zealand can move on from this in a peaceful way. I think if the government just come clean, admit their mistakes, and we move on, things will be fine. So thanks once again. I've been Andy Oakley.